Alright, we are now live, I believe. Just gonna load. Yes, we're live. So hello, everyone. Earlier stream today, I'm joined with Jack Lloyd, and we are going to discuss the when the use of force is proportional and when it's disproportionate. Do you want to give like a quick rundown of who you are and why people should care about your opinion?
Sure. I'm Jack Lloyd. I'm a multimedia producer for Liberty, a former criminal defense attorney who speaks out about a lot of different things that the government does, with precision on what it is that the government's doing that is messing with people's lives. I do all kinds of creative works to promote liberty, from memes to music and music videos to skits, producing The Philosopher and all kinds of things. Comic book series. I have my three nonfiction books as well: the Definitive Guide to Libertarian Voluntarism, A Vision for a Libertarian Future, and Philosophical Voluntarism, and produce a kids book, comic book series, and all kinds of stuff. So do quite a bit. And I think this will be a fun discussion to talk about the nuances of defense and whether or not it's an escalation and where the justice kind of falls in. And I think it's actually a really great discussion to have, because actually it's something that, as you can see here in Kinsella's book, Legal Foundations of a Free Society, this is something where we take an issue too. So, he discusses my view in his book. He has some different views, but he cites to me there for some of our nuances. So that'll be a fun discussion, on those nuances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I suppose what could be done first is I've been seeing a lot of LP accounts and LP adjacent accounts recently, with all the drama around LPNH. Around whether or not like libertarianism allows any sort of force at all. Is libertarianism a sort of pacifist ideology where you're never allowed to do anything? What is your view on that?
Right. So obviously, libertarianism is not pacifism by any means. The very nature of having property rights, right? This is a psychological concept that people have, right? It's a respect as to other people. If you didn't have other people, you're the only person on planet Earth, there wouldn't really be anything to deal with property rights, because animals can't reciprocate or understand what you mean by that, and you'd be alone. So we're in this idea of people being able to protect themselves and to be socially viewed as valid. I mean, that's what underpins the concept of property rights, is this idea of justifiable use of force. When are you able to use force to defend yourself or something that's claimed as your property? When can you possibly defend others, right? So at some level, in order to have meaningful weight, you have to be able to defend your body and property, your outer property, and or potentially others as well. Especially if you're a parent and you have a child, they're not going to be able to meaningfully defend themselves against someone else who might want to predate upon them. So that's where you would step in to stop a predator and things like that. So it should be a little obvious there that there is a defensive force in order to maintain what is property, but some people miss that.
Yeah, and I think this is defensive force. It becomes quite clear. There's this guy, I believe his name's Anthony DSA, and Kinsella's written some articles building on this theory, where if you have a property right, what that means is, in one level of analysis, you have the right to exclude people from something. And so if you have the right to exclude people from a thing, well, clearly that's going to involve some amount of force to do that exclusion. I think that is where this right to defense comes from. So I think you're allowed to do whatever is necessary to exclude someone from your property. Obviously, you couldn't just do whatever. Like if I was escorting you off my property, it takes maybe it's required that I grab you by the arm and move you. That's a use of force, but I wouldn't be able to start stabbing you in the arm whilst I'm doing that, because that's just completely irrelevant to your trespass.
Right, and that's often a mischaracterization that the commies and socialists like to make. They make the ANCAP. Oh, I'm gonna nuke you because there's a leaf from your property classified. I mean, that's a silly thing. And as I write in my books, the idea of trespass and what that entails, in terms of your defensive force rights, is the ability to remove someone off your subject property. It's not a right to just do anything or willy nilly whatever. The rightful remedy of trespass is removal, and there what the limits are is that you have the right to use as much force as necessary to remove somebody. And if someone escalates against you, in other words, they're using force to try to stop that, you're allowed to meet that force and to make sure that your force overcomes that. And that's just normal stuff, right? Just like at a bar or a club, a patron's getting unwieldy and they're, cursing at the bartender and they're trying to start fights, and they say, hey, you need to calm down or you're out of here, right? It's a property right that he doesn't own the bar. And if he violates those property rights, then the bouncer is going to take that person and physically remove them. And if that person starts to punch the bouncer's going to get physical with them and, rally them up and throw them out. And if they pull a weapon, well, now they're escalating force there as well, and they're able to use defensive force to stop that threat of grave bodily injury or deadly force. And that's all it is. It's I don't think it's even that's weird. It's pretty normal. I think people kind of have these norms already built into a lot of stuff. It's just when it comes to either mischaracterizations or more nuanced situations where there's complex I guess you could say history to something, where we're talking about governments or mafias or terrorists or this or that, then it gets more nuanced and complicated and it becomes more difficult for people to process. So,
Yeah, and I think on the mafia's front, like, whenever it's like sort of a remote aggression where I'm ordering some guy to order some guy to drop a bomb on your house or whatever, that like it gets hard for people to understand, because they haven't internalized that I can use other people as a means towards some end. So, like, if I am ordering my goon to go off and fight you, I'm also responsible for that aggression. It's sort of like they have this baked-in premise that only one person is ever responsible for any aggression, that there can't be multiple people in doing the same crime at the same time, right?
So this is actually that line where me and Kinsella have our big disagreement. And there is, of course, nuance there as well. I'm the person who takes the more limited approach. So I say that an individual is responsible for their individual acts. And what that means is that it's the person who's actually doing the harm, whether it's, they're shooting a gun at somebody or they're setting off a bomb, whatever it is that they're doing that is a wrongful act. They're responsible for that act. And to the extent that they're just, quote unquote, following orders, that is not itself an excuse for that person's actions. Obviously, they're a moral agent. They're responsible for the actions they take. But the person who is giving orders in and of itself, if that's all it is, that is not itself a property rights violation. Words alone don't do that. But I think that fundamentally, when we're looking, often at these complex orchestration situations, it's not likely that the person giving orders is not themselves culpable for other specific acts, right? For example, if you're, the head of a mafia, you're a knowing recipient of stolen property, right? Regardless of whether you get your hands bloody in the hits, you're most certainly going to be someone who's receiving large sums of money that was ill-gotten, that was a product of violence. So you are actually functionally responsible for that. And often, when we're talking about the amounts here, this is not just, they got $100. You're talking about a mafia or a more complex organization. This person has a level of severity in their theft that does merit a high level of defensive force. So that's where that would fall apart. But maybe where it gets more nuanced is the old hitman situation where it's a one-off thing. Some wife or husband wants to get rid of their spouse and they're going on Craigslist or some, chat, and they're like, hey, could someone help me get rid of my spouse? That's where it's going to get more nuanced. And that's where I would say the person who's responsible fully in that situation would just be the person who would carry out the violence, the hitman. I say for those people, they should get the worst form of sanction for that, for, attempted murder. And I would say, and I say, if every person who's willing to just follow orders vanished, you would just have people with bad ideas, right? That would be what's left, because if they're not willing to carry out the force themselves, well, then there is no violation. It's just people saying words you don't like. So I'm a little bit more of a NAP strict, person, and some people are more of the, we're going to collectivize responsibility just based on words alone.
Sure, I think I do want to dig into this because I'm definitely more on the Kinsella line. Why do you think it is that if I am giving an order to someone to then kill you, what about that means that I'm not also taking an action to try and kill you?
Because they're words alone. So it's kind of like the thought process when it comes to context. Where you might say, the phrase "I want to kill you." Right. Simplest context, like if someone's playing Fortnite or Halo. I was playing Halo the other night. It's a lot of fun. But if you say that in the video game, even though that is an action of, hey, I'm saying these words, I want to kill you, you understand the context is, okay, well, that there is clearly not an actual intent to kill somebody. The words alone are not themselves a part of the act. But the telling somebody the words, now you're like, okay, well, now this person really is going to do it. The question is, okay, well, are those words somehow becoming now a moral agent action that you're now responsible for those things? And to me, I don't see how that is so unless someone's going to make the argument that the words overcome the moral agent responsibility of the individual actor. Because now you're saying, well, guess what? They couldn't, help themselves, or you're responsible. Whereas if the person said, no, I'm not going to follow your orders, well, now you have someone just saying words, but no action, right? So to me, I find that the locus of responsibility is with the actor who's taking the action, and the further that we get away from that, there is a slippery slope that I see there. That the more it could be rationalized that you're tying in people's responsibility, where it's really the people who are taking the actions who are functionally responsible for those things. So again, it's not like there are no consequences, and I think that's another part, is that some people will say, well, then there's no consequences, and I'd say, what's going to happen, if at trial, the person who was, ordered to do the hit, is leaned on. They say, well, if you want to have lighter sentencing or this or that, you need to give up who it is. Well, they're going to say who told them to do the action. There's going to be publicity around that. They're going to face social consequences, right? Just like in any other situation, you see someone convicted of some type of thing, it's going to come with other social consequences in the market and, in other social relationships. So it's not like, oh, that's the end of things for them, that it's just total scot-free. But if we are focused on who is doing the actual actions and who is, taking those things and giving them the full responsibility of their actions, and of course, with the highest level of threats, some people might be like, oh, I'm against death penalty, this or that. But they, received that same treatment that they would give somebody else in their lives, there's not going to be too many, people left willing to commit those kinds of acts, right? The incentives are aligned with, if you try to be a hitman, just know your life's over. Those are the kind of incentives I would say you'd want to have incentivized in the first place, is that if you do those types of acts, that's it for you. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so I definitely agree that the hitman himself is definitely responsible for that crime, 100%. But I don't think that the hitman is responsible doesn't mean that other people can't also be responsible. Like, one way we could think about this is maybe it's a bomber plane, right? You need one person to fly the plane, one person to load the bombs, one person to drop the bombs, right? Press the button. I don't think it's just the person who presses the button to drop the bombs who's responsible. Maybe even more analogous, because maybe you would think that just the person who's dropping the bombs is responsible. But like, what if it was a rifle which was constructed such that it had 3 triggers on it, and all 3 people had to pull the trigger at the same time for a bullet to be fired? Would they not all be responsible if they all aimed the gun together and all decided to pull the trigger to fire a bullet to kill someone?
Yes, and that is actually what I do agree with, is the action aspect. So that is delineating from pure speech versus you're physically taking part in the action in order to do the harm. And I would say the same thing. And in fact, it's this level of like libertarian legal nuance kind of thing, where, even if someone, let's just say they want to hire a hitman, right? But instead of just simply hiring the hitman, they actually provided the weapon. So they gave the weapon to the hitman, right? I would say now they have a responsibility because they're actually participating and giving over the weapon to actually carry out the act. It's more than just words. So it's this very narrow category that, it's the depths of the theory, but that's just it. It's that little line between, okay, just words versus you're actually participating, just like you said. If there's multiple people who have to orchestrate a rocket attack. There's people who are setting up the mortar. There's a loader. There's a fire. Yes, all those people I would say would be responsible. They've taken actions to actually carry out the action required to end life and to hurt other people. So that would certainly be something I agree with you on. That when you're taking those actual actions necessary to create and complete the harm, then yes, you are responsible as well.
Okay, so that definitely narrows down our area of disagreement quite a bit.
Right.
So I think what the disagreement is over where the line is when it becomes aggression. So, my stance, and I believe this is Kinsel's stance as well, is that it's aggression if you cause conflict, if you cause some conflict to occur. And I think you can cause a conflict to occur through speech acts. So I'm sort of curious about what is it about the action being speech, that makes it just speech rather than a potentially aggressive speech.
For me, always when you're going to put that into a context, okay, where is this coming together as a bigger picture for at least self-defense? I think that would be important as a total picture context. For example, in someone about to create an imminent harm, right? Someone's coming at you with an axe in their hand and they say, "I'm going to kill you," right? They're walking at you, they have an axe in their hand, and they say they're going to kill you. Okay, yes, you take their speech, but it's not solely the speech, right? The other stances and the motion, the actual action is taken together as, oh my gosh, I'm in fear of my life. This person is literally, saying their intent. They're coming at me to kill me. I got to use self-defense or they're going to, hit me. That is totally fine as a total picture for, imminent self-defense to, go ahead and draw on that person and take them out before they literally kill you. I would just say that that's a wide difference between that and someone who's, 3,000 miles away and they're mad at you in the internet. They're like, "I'm going to kill you," something like that, and you're just like, okay, but they're not actually taking any actions to, they're just mad at you and they're just, being a troll on the internet kind of thing. Right. Obviously you can be concerned about that and be like, hey, what are they actually doing? Is this a serious threat? But just words alone and there's no action toward it. People will say all kinds of things when they're heated and angry and this or that, and certainly, should be taken seriously, but without the nexus of action, with steps taken to specifically carry that out toward that destructive end, that property rights violative end, to me, that is just words alone. And if we want to protect people's ability to speak freely within the context of property rights, and they're not actually making a manifest attack on somebody, that has to be protected. We have to err on the side of protecting that ability to say things within your property rights in order to avoid, the kind of stuff that you can see where just like there was a case a couple years ago with a guy in Florida. He was posting his picture of his weapons, right? Just showing them off, nothing, totally benign. He had been critical of police, dealing with certain situations, at a certain public school with, how, there's certain mass shooting things. And so the police wanted to go after him for his speech of posting his pictures of his builds online, right? They're like, see, you just really want to, come after us and take out the school. And he's like, no, I was just showing, these pictures of my guns. But in that context, people will take things as, oh, see, you're posting this as a threat to me. See, now I need to get to come after you, even though it's him just showing off his builds and being critical of the government for something else. So, it's just that kind of balance, that it's a very thin line, between those two things. But I err on that one thin line on saying, okay, protect the speech and the property rights there without the action.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would agree that, like the kid on Halo who just says, "I'm going to kill you," that because of the full context, that they're not actually communicating a threat to kill you because they have absolutely no means of doing so. And I agree that that's very different from the axe murderer screaming he's going to kill you, because everything else about him is communicating that he is really going to try and kill you. But I think the mob boss is a lot closer to the axe murderer than the kid on Halo, because everything about a mob boss is you understand and he understands that when he says, go whack Jimmy the Screw or whatever, right? When he says that means that's going to happen. And he has this sort of, he is using his goons as tools in his empire to try and take people out. I think that is, and this is why I think, I believe the context is similar for an Adolf Hitler type character, where Adolf Hitler wasn't going into all the gas chambers and individually flipping all the switches himself. He was just putting out an order to all his men saying, hey, start killing off all these Jews. And with the context of that, I think you can take it that Hitler is threatening the Jews and is taking aggressive action against them.
So yeah, this was actually one of those, of course, everybody likes to use that example, right? The common reference to that time is the what would he have done, right? But for me, again, we can say, what if he never actually did any harms? And this is what I brought up with Kinsella. I said, functionally, it doesn't matter because obviously Hitler knew he was a recipient of theft and stolen property. He lived off of it. He knew he was getting the plunder. So you could easily go after him on that alone and have enough for, a death sentence with the amount that he was responsible for consuming and for himself and stealing. But the other part, this like theoretical, would he, be responsible for everything else? I think it doesn't really fundamentally matter because what matters is the people who are actually following the orders doing the harm. They're the ones who are carrying out the actions and they are the ones who need to be held responsible on those actions. And whether he, that is, as an individual, was held responsible for all those other things, to me, wouldn't really be material in the end to justice. The question is just what was he doing and, what could someone have done possibly take him out? I would say, if you were to actually, go after him, right, for the other things, he was going to, pull a weapon himself, right? Supposedly he pulled a weapon on himself at the end when he was being cornered. So fundamentally, if you're going after him for the other things, then he started to escalate, which he would. If you try, to resist him, you would be justified in using defensive force against him regardless, right? So, whether or not he's responsible for every single death of every gypsy or Jew or whatever, to me, it's immaterial. The people who carried those things out most certainly are, and they're the ones who are following orders and did the actions, and they all need to be held responsible, though, many of them went to Argentina, but or the U.S. government. But, the general gist there is that we should be focused on really being clear with responsibility and who is actually doing what. And that's a part of moral agency, right? This idea that each person is responsible for their individual actions. They have a choice, even under undesirable outcomes. They still have a choice about what they're going to do. And if they choose to go along and just to say, okay, well, I'm going to murder, well, then that is on that person. And in other situations, there could be these types of you can call it a felony murder rule situations where sometimes a person will be charged with what was done by another in a scheme, right? There's two guys that go into a bank. The plan originally is not to shoot anybody. They're just going to go, steal the money. They're going to rob it. But then one of the guys shoots somebody and they, get injured and died. And the other person's like, no, that's not what I wanted. Some people say, well, the other robber, they're responsible for that death because by committing a felony, now you're responsible for anything that happens. And I would say to that, no, they would be responsible for the robbery, but the person who actually did the shooting, they're the responsible party for that death. Again, it's those nuanced areas where I understand that some people just might not find what I say favorable, and they're like, no, I want to have collective guilt for everybody always. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't argue with popularity. I'm just arguing with the very fine nuance of actor, action, moral responsibility. And if we really do believe that each person is fully responsible for their actions outside of independent influence, right? Someone being drugged, without their consent and having their mind altered, that kind of thing. Each person is going to have the locus of responsibility on themselves for their own actions. And I think that when that happens and you have the greatest amount of sanction for the severity of those actions, then we end up with all the people willing to just follow orders disappearing very quickly.
I mean, so I do think it is somewhat important to nail the theory on this point, and perhaps not in the case of Hitler, like maybe he did enough other things personally to where the punishment would be the same. But I think it is important so that we could apply it to other situations to really dig down and go, okay, well, is it possible for someone to use another person as a means in an aggression? And I think there are other areas where we have to accept that it is possible to use others as a means. Like, Kinsella uses the example of a mail bomber, where he, uses the US Postal Service to send bombs to people. and so he's not responsible anymore because the U.S. postal deliverer, he decided to deliver the package, and then even the delivery guy isn't responsible because the person who received the package, they decided to open it, and so really it was a suicide the whole time. Like, I don't think that analysis, and Kazal agrees, I don't think that analysis works, because the guy who sent the package, he sent that package with full knowledge that he did it deceptively, mind you, but he did it with knowledge that almost certainly everybody along the chain is going to make those choices. So I don't think the introduction of choices by others makes it such that he no longer did that crime.
Right, I would say that's right. That's not the correct framing. The framing there that's supposed to be, from my view, is that the post office person is not responsible because they're not there knowingly, willingly trying to, blow somebody up. They're innocently taking a package. They're not the ones who are creating the bomb. They didn't develop that. That's the responsibility of the person who sent it. The person who sent it is the creator. Their actions are the ones that have the logical nexus of connection, the causal relationship of that creation and that end result explosion. The person who is delivering has absolutely no idea and is not doing so in some intentionally reckless or negligent way where they're like, yeah, I'm just going to be totally ignorant. No, they're just doing their regular job of delivering packages for people. It's a normal business thing. So that's definitely a far cry from someone who is employed in organized crime. Like, yes, my job is to go knock some heads and, put someone in a cave and let rats eat their face. That's a whole different moral responsibility situation, right? One is where it's, mafia, they are knowingly, willingly, intentionally going to harm people and steal from people. Whereas the package delivery guy, yes, he is a rational human actor who has his own moral agency, but his actions in and of themselves were just benign. He's just delivering packages, not trying to blow people up or anything like that. He didn't even know. Whereas the person who actually put it in, they're the ones who are actually taking the action and are manifestly causal relationship trying to create that end. In the same way, and I think we talked about this too, like we had a little fun with it. Like if someone had a remote control car, that kind of thing, and they're driving it, and they're the causal actor. They're intentionally using the machinery to create that end result. They're the person who set that in motion with the intended, result of hurting people. So it's the same thing. Someone could be unwittingly used to cause harm, but that's the whole thing. Is unwittingly means that they don't know and they're not intending to cause harm to others. They have been used, but they're not an intervening moral agent with their own responsibility. It'd be way different though if before they ever get there, they, somehow the package got ripped open. They look inside, they're like, oh my gosh, this is a ticking time bomb. And they're like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go put this bomb at that person's house. Right now, it's like, okay, whoa, you just, made yourself aware there's a bomb and now you're going to go put it somewhere else. Like, that now you're opening yourself up to at least negligence of some sort because, you're knowingly taking a bomb and then be like, oh, let me just go put this on someone's mailbox. So, and again, that's not their fault either that they were given a bomb. At that point, they're going to have restitution and different types of sanctions against the person who caused them to become possessed with this bomb that they would not obviously that no mail carrier is like, yes, please give me a live bomb, right? So he would have his own claims against the person who set off that ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could move on from there, but I believe now, based on what you said there, sort of understood what the specific disagreement is, and it's only when the person in the middle of the chain knows that the chain is there, that the chain is broken. But that seems to be strange to me, because then it's not just that, well, this person has free will, so they can make a choice, because that is true whether they're deceived or not, right? So I'm not sure why it is that them knowing what it is and conspiring with the person who set it off, why that means that the person who set it off is no longer responsible.
Well, we're talking, and to be very narrow, we're talking about words versus actions, right? So someone, again, and this is a very rare, weird situation. It's that nuance of nuance, but they have to be literally only using words, right? Someone's just, basically hiring a hit kind of thing, typically. People who are engaged in mafia activities are typically long-term recipients of stolen plunder and violence, and then themselves would have their own violative acts that require restitution justice and to be able to be brought in over that kind of thing. So Well, all I'm saying is that within that narrow context, when we're saying, okay, what charges is this person going to get? What charges is this person going to get? The person who's carrying out the physical harms, and people who are participating in that physically would get those charges. And the people who are orchestrating in most cases, because in most cases, they were just day one, I'm just an upstanding person, and day two, I'm a huge mafia boss, right? They would be charged with the things that they were responsible for, especially their knowing stolen receipt of goods, and that's going to be pretty substantial in most cases, enough to possibly merit some of the most extreme sanctions, because often this is, I guess with inflation it's kind of hard to nail it, but in the millions of dollars possibly, right? Someone who has a criminal enterprise, which in terms of lives, right, and we could talk about this too later, what's a life worth in restitution and in terms of money, that could be the equivalent of a human life of stolen goods, where it's like, okay, you're at a level where your life's on the line in terms of justice. So,
yes, we do have a super chat from Kareem Mays targeted at you. If you want to comment on this,
I know Kareem.
Yeah, there you go. So he says, trying to be president is an unjustified hierarchy, so the NEP does not apply. Thought Slime's analysis on this is correct here. What is your view on that?
I mean, I wouldn't call it unjustified hierarchy. It's just, plain old, theft and plain old, mafia activities. That would be the root, would be the mass violence and, carrying all that out. And again, the same things apply there. If we get the political realm, at a bare minimum, every single political leader is a certain knowing recipient of stolen plunder, some more than others and some more corrupt than others. Some go as far as to have political hits of their enemies, right? So, there's going to be nuances to each person, but that's why when it comes to the political arena, you have both the enforcement agencies and then, of course, those who are knowing recipients of stolen plunder. So,
Yeah, and I suppose my comment on that would be, I don't think that just because it's, in Kareem's words, an unjustified hierarchy, that doesn't mean that the NEP no longer applies. Like, I think the NEP applies universally. It's just that, and this was another topic where we could bring up, there are some times when punishment comes into it, and I don't think punishment is a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you there that the NAP is always universal for all people, all time. There's no exception to that. It's just that within the non-aggression principle, there is a concept of restitution for aggression, right? If you have aggression, there needs to be restitution if you want to be made whole. Otherwise, there's just pure aggression and never anybody ever being made whole. And you just, I get away with it, right? There's no stopping that. There's no checks to that, which of course is obviously very silly, because most everybody doesn't want to be in that situation where they don't get their stolen goods back. Everybody by default wants their consent respected. So, that's just something that is a matter of social market norms and how that ultimately gets resolved, right? In terms of, what happens after.
Mm-hmm. And I think there is also, and this might be another area where you disagree with Kinsella, there is also the realm of retribution, which I believe is justified on estoppel grounds. Was your view on the estoppel justification?
Sure. So yeah, this can get into the more fun weeds. So for those who don't know, right, we were talking about retribution. This is a criminal justice norm. It's the idea that someone who's an offender, and we'll bring it to the libertarian context, which means there has to be a property rights violation, body or out of property. Someone needs to be punished in order for there to be justice. They need to feel pain or suffering that transcends any means of restitution in order for there to be justice. So if someone steals $100 from you, you could get that $100 back, maybe a little bit, extra, something like that, because of the time spent to get it back. But then there's this idea that, okay, beyond this restitution, there should be specific punishment to make the offender feel contrite and to feel pain and to make others feel like this person has suffered for harming others, that kind of thing. So for me, I'm not a retributivist focused person, not in terms of, okay, that's the goal of justice. I would say that in terms of the restitution process, of course, that needs to be something that's done, appropriately for whatever it is that was the harm that was done. And in many cases, it's going to be difficult to make that perfect, right? Cancel, and there's another area that we have a difference on, because he sometimes will say when it comes to the restitution part that the goods have to be the same, especially in breach of contract. So if it's not like even the same dollar bills and they're just out of the money, then it's just a loss. Whereas I would say, if someone took money from you, but it's not the exact bills, fungibly, you can have the same restitution with different bills. Yeah, they're different marks, but it's functionally the same. You would restore as best as possible what was lost, even if you can't get the exact same subject property. But when it comes to what we're thinking about with retribution, restitution, of course, and there's this thing called rehabilitation and restorative justice. It's really a question of what's going to happen in the future and what are the ripple effects. Because in economics, right, we're often thinking about you say you want this policy, but then what happens? And then what happens? And what are the incentives and so on and so forth? You can't just stop at one order of thinking. The same thing applies with the criminal legal realm. And if we are trying to reduce the aggression, we're trying to stop future recidivism, which is someone being a repeat offender, just having a pure retributivist model as it stands in the United States, where people are kept in prison and then they're basically marked as being a felon, and they lose certain types of either political rights or social rights and things like that. That doesn't really help somebody live a nonviolent life afterward, right? The American prison system effectively keeps people in this kind of horrific reactive environment and doesn't get them to a point of rehabilitation to where they're able to function normally, hold down work, and basically reintegrate without being tempted to fall back into whatever it was that may have led there, whether it was addiction or something else, type of trauma, this or that. So I compare the model with the U.S. to other countries, especially some of the Nordic models, and I point to the fact that those who are more focused on rehabilitation as opposed to, the goal is just to make this person suffer and be in a cage and isolated and dumbed down and constantly in fear, that those other models long term are going to produce people who actually come out, assuming that they're safe to come out, right? But they come out and they're actually able to just work and function, live normally, and now you're cutting back on future harms, right? That kind of thing. So that is an interesting discourse to have, on which direction and why and what makes sense. But even for me, I still do have my limits for I guess you could say retribution and rehabilitation. I certainly believe that there's a point where someone is too much of a threat to other people, and the actions that they've taken merit, banishment or death sentence, that kind of thing. And that does make me also stick out from some people in libertarianism who are against the death penalty for whatever reason, whether it's just the government doing it or generally. But certainly there's some people just like Jeffrey Dahmer who I don't think that is a case for keeping them in prison and having them be subsidizing the taxpayers' teat. But it's just an important thing to think about. What's being done? Why are you actually getting closer to restitution? Are you actually getting to a point where someone is being made whole, or is it making it harder? And that's what I like to think about, especially if the goal, within libertarian property rights theorizing is to undo harms, make people whole, and avoid there being future property rights violations.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is something to be said for not just having pure eye for an eye type punishment. I do think eye for an eye is justified. So people are allowed to do that. But I think it's also because it's scarce. Like if you've punched me, it's a scarce right for me to punch you back. So I think I can trade that back to you for perhaps another punishment. So maybe if we take it for a bigger crime, maybe you try and kill me. So I would be allowed to, on estoppel grounds, I would be allowed to kill you. Then I could say, hey, I'm a civilized man. I don't want to kill you. I would much rather that you pay off this huge debt to me. and you work for however long, and you give me a bunch of money. And then once that's done, squared away, you get your right to retribution back, and I'm not allowed to kill you anymore. Um, and this is actually on a point where I do slightly disagree with Kinsella on estoppel. So I agree with his argument that retribution is allowed, but he has also this caveat where he says you're allowed to go for lesser retributions. So like if I had the right to, cut your arm off, then I would also be allowed to, instead of doing that, do a lesser retribution of some money or even like punching you. But I don't think there is any way, and I don't know, I don't know if I'm remembering this completely correctly, but I remember it's something like that. And I don't know how it is that you can say what retribution is lesser or greater in any sort of objective way, because I might prefer to have my arm cut off than to lose $100, right? If I'm the criminal. So then are we then trying to force certain preferences onto the criminals? I don't know how that can be done, right?
Right. There's going to be obviously the subjectivity there in terms of, what can be exchanged. I think Kinsella makes this example with the act of rape, that one burly man tries to rape a woman and he's stopped in the act. Well, she can't go and, rape him back and make that like, oh yeah, that's it.
Nope. You still there? I think we cut out. Oh, there we go.
I'm back.
There we go. Yes.
Okay. Right at the good part, right? Where okay, so right, the part of the who can rape who, right? So you can't really make that a 1-for-1. This guy's experience versus how she would experience that. It's kind of always going to be an imprecise thing. So my balance there, and I balance it with what Kinsella says, because I do agree with you that functionally this concept of estoppel, like you can't claim what you could do to others, you can't be done to yourself. I think that's a kind of a hypocrisy 1-for-1 issue. I think that is balanced within a victim's rights oriented framework, and what that means is that a victim has the ability to say what justice makes most sense for them. And that means that it should be up to the victim to say, hey, okay, I would prefer retribution or rehabilitation, that kind of thing, and restitution. They should be able to choose among those things. And especially so where, it's probably not the case that, restitution could be made, in those types of situations. I think that it's going to inherently, there's always going to be some subjectivity to it, because if there's a financial amount, saying psychological, emotional harm, physical harm, that's going to be subjective to juries potentially, and what a victim is seeking, right? There's no, hey, your arm is worth this much dollars if it gets cut off, right? Or if you get your knee broken. There's never going to be a precise number that just represents that for all people, kind of thing. So inherently, it's going to be some element of subjectivity and case law and time. But I think that really what matters is having it victim centric, giving them the options within what's possible. Say, hey, you can go this route, or you can go this route. If you go this route, you're more likely to get, restitution financially, in a rehabilitation sense. If you do retribution, you might not have anything to show for it. Just giving them options, that kind of thing, and then going from there. I think that usually is going to make a lot more sense, because then it's actually giving the victim a meaningful voice in how they would like to be restituted, right? Because the whole goal, right, is to have specific individual claims over property rights. It's not you hurt society as a whole. There's no amorphous blob of society's victims. It's the people who are specifically harmed, and they're the people who are going to be the ones who can speak to how they were harmed, what was taken from them, and to try to provide reason and evidence about what it is that they need to be restituted. And, that's going to be, of course, as typically is the case, metered within the bounds of, the courts with the judge and jury and what might be permissible, right? You can't be like, hey, I stubbed my toe, I want $10 million, right? There's gonna be limits, and of course juries are gonna sit there and weigh in on that kind of thing. If you're still on the statist legal paradigm, and maybe some alternatives, you could just discuss those too, but that's just the inherent nature of subjective harm, and someone making the case about what happened to them and what they value that as, basically.
Yeah, so I think my problem with that is that I do agree that there are limits, there's proportionality, but I don't think those limits come from or can come from what a jury thinks or what a judge thinks. I think the proper role of a judge is to apply an objective legal theory. So we would have to figure out what these limits would be objectively, and I think it is straight up restitution, which is just getting back your property again, right? Being made whole. If it's like been destroyed, they have to repair it or whatever. And plus retribution, so long as they have mens rea, so long as they deliberately did the thing, I think retribution is justified. And I think retribution is literally only the same action back to them. I don't think you're able to choose on your own a lower action, because I don't think there is a lower type of punishment. I don't think that is meaningful. But you could negotiate for different sorts of punishments, but I think it would have to be agreed on by the criminal and the victim, and you could have it in a contract, right? I think that is where the objective limit comes in, so that at the end of the day, maybe the criminal just is real bad guy. He just doesn't want to agree to any like rehabilitation or anything, and he didn't want to do anything civilized. Then the judge can just turn to the victim and go, like, "You look, this guy's a murderer. Just fucking get rid of him or something. Like, this guy's not gonna agree to anything. Fine, there you go. We'll grant you the maximal punishment."
Yeah, I mean, certainly that could be the case. I think that the question of objectivity is a good aim. Certainly, it's easier the more it's concrete. And oh, they stole my wallet, and inside was these cards and these bills, and the wallet was this much money. Okay, you can be more objective about how much it would be to replace that. But if you're talking about, I was in a car crash and I got this back injury and I can't work, or I lost my arm, or you have a big guy and he's punching a small woman, he's 6'6", she's 5'4", how do you make that? Oh, well, that punch.
Nope. We're still here.
We're back.
There we go. Good.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, just say before, so there's going to be inherently some elements of subjectivity. Just like talking about, there's a big guy, a small girl kind of situation. He punches her. It can't really be avoided. At some level, there's going to be a subjective experience and an attempt to try to get that as close as possible. But just like a big guy trying to sexually assault a small woman, trying to match that. You're not going to find like, well, here's a 7'5" guy and he's going to sexually assault you now. So you can feel what it feels like to be a 5'4" woman. It's just there's going to be some subjectivity, but I agree with you there. The goal is always to be as objective as possible, find as concretely as possible what the damages could be. And that's pretty typical too, just showing medical bills, showing damages. If you have a car damage or this or that, you do your best. If you're an attorney in court, you're bringing as many receipts as you can to show here's what it is. And then you're going to get to emotional damages and pain damage and damages and other things and therapy that you need, to get a little more subjective. But that's the nature of justice.
Yes, we did also get another super chat from Kareem. Thank you very much, Kareem. Where he's saying that, are we still here? It seems like your camera has frozen. Hello? Me. I don't know what's going on. My internet fucked. Your health. Looks like my internet's fine. Weird. Okay, Discord's Bring it up. Hmm. There we go.
Okay, I'm back.
It's very strange.
Yeah, that's very, very strange. We had a smooth talk last time, so
Yeah.
I gotta figure out what's going on.
What's going on there? Must be some storm over the Atlantic is cutting us off or something.
Right?
Anyway, we did
All
get
right.
another super chat from Kareem where he is saying sort of I'll just read it out, and I have my own problems with this. I'll see what your take on it. You should base punishment based on customary law, common law, Brechen law, Sharia, etc. That's the praxeological thing to do based on region and culture. Worked well in Somalia. Basically, like a bunch of competing different legal systems that would be in the same world. I had a debate with him on something similar to this.
Yeah, I mean, there's this concept, of course, of polycentric law. I mean, for the purposes of our libertarian theorizing, I think that transcends that concept because libertarian theory is itself the foundations. In other words, it's the bare minimums, at least at a minimum, for what is aggression, what is not. So I would say I would be against any legal system that would turn non-aggression into aggression and vice versa. So it's going to be a big distinguishing factor as far as I'm concerned, between that and everything else. I mean, obviously there's going to be nuances as relates to different technical procedures about how long in advance you need to file things, or what are the sanctions potentially, like different ranges. There might be, different things, but in terms of the aggression versus non-aggression, that's non-negotiable regardless of culture, continent, country. As libertarians, those are our advocacies that make up those bare minimums, and so that's really what matters.
Yeah, and that's like sort of my big problem with David Friedman, because he has the polycentric theory of law, right, where he's saying, well, you'd have different legal codes would arise on the market, but even just there, I'm not sure what he means by on the market, because he doesn't have the non-aggression principle to lay back on. So, like, did the US legal system, did that arise on the market? Because, like, well, people did choose it. It didn't come about, like, God didn't come down from the heavens and say, hear you, you're going to have this legal system. And people were like, oh, okay then, I guess so. So I don't know how he can identify a market legal principle as against a non-market legal principle. I don't know where he's drawing the distinction, because he can't say, well, one's aggressive, one isn't. He doesn't believe in the non-aggression principle. And that's like my main problem with a lot of these theories of we'll have a bunch of different laws in different areas. Like, I think the law has to be objective.
Right. The common law aspect to this, and talking about where you could have, polycentric law or market-based law, to me, that's more so commercial law. Because if you look at the history, in terms of common law, a lot of that either arose, you go back to, to England and people like kind of arbitrate disputes, or, more, I think, internationally, when it came to global shipping, right? There was many different types of shipping companies. They want to go to ports. They wanted to deal with disputes, right? When it comes to merchandise, that's where you got guilds that would come up with common law things where it's like, hey, we want to actually coordinate for the sake of making trade easy. We just want to get our disputes settled quickly and move on because we want to make some money. So, in the market sense, the commercial side of things, when it comes to, civil laws, I think that is more ripe for, polycentric law, in terms of you could have competing organizations like, okay, I want to join with this guild, and all the businesses that I do business with, they're going to subscribe to these arbitration rules or this arbitration group. That makes sense. You can't really do that with criminal justice norms without inherently, having some conflicts arise, as I already do, because there's already different countries and they have different legal norms, and some will extradite and some won't. And you'll have people who flee, imaginary lines of borders, and they'll, go to different places to try to, get their way through those things, whether it's something for good like Snowden or something for bad like someone trying to escape was there, Roman Polanski, some kid. So there's going to be different things. I would just say that as libertarians, our goal should be to get the libertarian legal norms to be the standard, regardless of the system or how it arises. I don't care whether it's common law. I don't care if it's commercial. I don't care if it's the current statutory law with the state. The goal is always, hey, here's the basic tenets of libertarianism, and we want to infuse that everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's market-based, organic. It doesn't matter if there's like some religious form of laws and this or that, like it's the Vatican's, own legal system, and they have their own, attorneys and judges and stuff like that. Those principles we still want to instill everywhere. It's something that is universal. These types of aggression versus non-aggression, at a bare minimum, for the purposes of saying, okay, this is a harm and this requires, justice, retribution, restitution, that kind of thing. So I'd say that that's a bit more my focus. The question of what would arise in the market later on, for that, I say start with commercial. That's people already do that now, and they agree to arbitrations all the time. Then move, the Overton window, get the criminal laws, with what is to be libertarian over time, and then we can see what happens after that. As you're moving toward a market-based system. So,
and I think there are definitely good things about the common law or the more polycentric type of law. With common law, I believe Kinsella talks about this, and Bruno Leone maybe as well, where with common law, instead of just saying, oh, what did the government say? They said this, okay, therefore do it, right? With like civil law. With common law, the judge in every situation is at least trying to do justice. Like he's looking at the situation going, okay, what would be the just decision? I think if you had a system like that with an actual objective legal theory thought up by jurists and told to these judges, then I think you get to what my legal system would look like. Because it's people just trying to do justice. Because obviously, from the armchair, we can't theorize about every possible situation that could ever arise. So I think you do still need some reasonable, rational judges out there.
Yeah, and it's always going to be subjective at the end of the day because, and I'm actually writing about this in my next book, which will take some time, but it's a legal libertarian primer. It's it's on libertarian legal theory. But one of the things I'm noting in that book is that even the standards of proof, like we have this in America, this difference between the civil law and the criminal. We have this sometimes is encapsulated as 51%. And then we have for criminal beyond a reasonable doubt, which some say is 90% certain. Some say it's 99% certain. I like just saying that you have no reasonable doubts, because if you are beyond a reasonable doubt, that means you have no reasonable doubts because you're beyond them. But it's just the whole point is at some point you're going to say, okay, what is the sufficient amount of evidence that is going to convict somebody of either a civil harm or a criminal harm? And that's always going to be subjective. There is no, specific objective. Here's the criteria. You must check all these boxes, and it, mathematically computes perfectly every time. You're going to always have fallible human beings who are observing the evidence as best they can within certain rules, right? That will determine what is allowed in versus what is not. And this battle happens all the time in courts now. There's attorneys who will make what's called a motion in limine, and that means that they're trying to get evidence out because there's something wrong with it. Either it's prejudicial or the police obtained it in violation of the Fourth Amendment in terms of privacy. So it's going to inherently have some subjectivity. But the one thing that we can be objective on are the libertarian rules, like the sense of aggression versus non-aggression in terms of property rights concepts themselves. But the discovery of whether that actually happened and whether there's a sufficient amount of evidence to convince people like, okay, that did happen, that is always going to be, unfortunately, tied to human beings. Unless you have a dystopian world where every single person is monitored at all times, and all conversations and all of it, somehow magically, which that'd be horrific. Sounds like a really bad movie. There's going to be gaps. There's going to be, he said, she said. There's going to be, this happened and I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't me,
Mm-hmm.
So
I do have some disagreement with what you said there, but I do want to check if you have like a time limit, like if you've got to go off at the end of the hour or anything.
Oh no, we're still good.
Okay, good. So I disagree that the standards of proof, what counts as proven that a crime has occurred, I disagree that that is subjective. I think I think this is basically epistemology, right? It's studying, well, how do you know that this thing happened? How do you know that this is the case? Right? And I think you can apply objective epistemology to this. I think the objectivist epistemology is definitely true. And if you apply that to a certain legal case, that epistemology definitely does. Like, it informs your entire legal theory, because the epistemology is so much more fundamental. Like, for instance, with like the Salem witch trials, their epistemology was basically entirely mystic, right? It was, well, this person over there, he did a spirit attack on me, and they counted that as evidence that the person did a spirit attack on them. Because, like, what could they say? It's like, no, I didn't do a spirit attack. Oh, so you're questioning, like, faith? No, because spirit attacks aren't possible. So you're questioning that God is real and spirits can attack people? Like, their epistemology and their metaphysics informed the types of legal cases that they would have and how they would try those cases. But I think if you have a proper philosophy prior to your legal theory, you would be able to apply, like, okay, have they proven that this crime happened? Right? You can investigate it. You can look at the situation and everything. So I think it definitely can be objective, and I think you can achieve certainty within whether or not a crime happened. That's of course a prior epistemic question. Maybe you don't want to have an epistemology debate at the moment.
I would say that it's pretty clear to me, having done this stuff, have been a criminal defense attorney, that there is going to be subjectivity to this idea of whether or not you personally think that your doubt is reasonable, even in this context, right? Because you could sit there and look at evidence, but the evidence may not necessarily be factual. You could have a witness who claims they saw someone do something, right? The Innocence Project does this all the time, where they exonerate people who've been sitting on death row for decades, and then they find some DNA evidence that shows this person didn't do it. But the witnesses, and there are several of them, all claim it was this guy, right? They think, oh, it was him. Well, there's enough witnesses, I think. But in truth, it wasn't actually the person, and they either through error, subjective human error of what they saw, or because of maybe kind of jumping to conclusions or personal biases, depends on what the context is, they made a conviction, right? So I think that you can look at many tough cases, like you look at Casey Anthony case or O.J. Simpson's case, with his murder case, and Jack Harker, the glove things. You could see, okay, there is no direct physical evidence of this person, this place. They were caught red-handed, they were caught in video. It's all circumstantial. And you have to take a look at each of those things, and you're going to make a judgment based on what is allowed. And even there, depending on defense and the prosecution, maybe there is something that would be very strong and definitive, but maybe it doesn't get allowed in for a reason, and the defense is able to keep it from the trial, right? Or vice versa. The prosecutor gets something in that they shouldn't have. And now people think something that's not true that should have been kept out. Right. And so this is something that happens all the time. Sometimes, you get overturning convictions because of improper evidence or, improper state. I think that while it would be nice, there was some exact bright line that, yes, we know for sure that this is, empirically the truth. The nature of collecting evidence, showing evidence is itself a human centric system. Whether something gets in or not is all part of human error. Whether someone's testimony should be believed or not, again, is a part of their subjectiveness, and they could be wrong. So it's something that we're, I think, unfortunately tied to. But as libertarians, we would say, well, we should save, if we're going to talk about, maybe the sanctions aspect, we should save sanction maybe for those which have the strongest evidence, right? Where you have a lot of witnesses, maybe they're caught on video. It's like, okay, well, this is, there's a lot of evidence here, that kind of thing. And maybe that is more meriting of a stronger sentence because you have more certainty versus, oh, we have some eyewitnesses and some circumstantial, it's not exactly sure. That's where we can maybe make distinctions for purposes of maybe sentencing and things like that. But I think that it's going to just be, inherently tied, the process of intake, the process of deliberation, and the process of self-reflection. Do I, as an individual, think that there's enough evidence? Well, you go around the room and each person could say, I have a doubt or I don't, even though they're looking at the same thing. That's where it's kind of difficult.
So I think some of the things you brought up there are just, they're pointing to epistemic flaws within the current justice system. Like, for instance, having a jury. I don't think there should be a jury, because I don't think having a bunch of random people be convinced of someone's guilt or innocence is any evidence of whether they were guilty or innocent. I think bring in whatever evidence you want and demonstrate that this person is either guilty or innocent. I think that is the correct way to go about it. And I think, yes, that could yield some errors. People are capable of falling into errors, but I don't think that they're capable of falling into errors is enough to demonstrate that the standards of proof will necessarily be subjective and erroneous. I think they can be correct.
I would say that there, even if you don't have a jury, as you said, the judge is still a person, and that person has their own biases. They have their own subjective experiences that they're going to, import to the situation. I've been across judges where the judge was really adamant about making sure everything was done right. I've been with a judge who was like, I can't wait to get home and see the football game. Let's get this over with. So, you're going to have inherently the limits to human fallibility and people's ability to apply things, because nobody is perfect and correct all the time, 100% of the time. Otherwise, they would be, universally consistent and they would be omniscient. But I think that, you could make an argument that maybe instead of random people, you could have what would be informed experts, people who are trained in looking at evidence. Then that will import its own biases potentially into the situation about how they were trained and where they might have their backgrounds from and why they chose that profession in the first place, right? There's the incentives there. So it's very difficult to, divorce the human subjectivity from the situation. We can only maybe get better potentially at the standards for what is allowed in admissibility, right? The strenuousness of the proof in terms of, okay, what evidence is allowed in or not allowed in. We could get more strenuous in the standards, like how, as they're articulated, in terms of what must be thought of in order to reach a conclusion of a conviction or a judgment. But you're still having people making decisions, so it just comes to the territory in my opinion. So
sure. So I definitely I agree that it is possible to have biased people who are making irrational decisions and all this, but I don't think that demonstrates that a legal system has to have, like, as a matter of operation, just fundamentally, institutionally, a bias or irrationality in it. I think it is possible to identify when someone has made an irrational decision and identify the causes of that irrational decision and then make it so that those things don't happen.
Then I would just point back to like the witness example. Why is it rational or irrational to believe a witness? A witness could say all the right things. They could say they were at a place at a time that factually is true. They could say that they saw something happen, and it could be factually true in terms of the generic detail, but they may be mistaken in the identity. And someone could take that piece of evidence, that is the witness testimony, and they could think about it and challenge it. But whether they ultimately believe it, that is a subjective choice, and someone is subjectively saying why they think it is worth believing or not. And so that's going to just be, totality of the circumstances situation. That's why, it's a whole process of bringing in multiple different things to the table, whether it's physical evidence, pictures, testimonies, forensics, officers at the scene, that kind of thing. There's a variety of different things that are brought in, and the level of how much credence you're going to give each thing. That's what happens when you have a defense attorney walk through those things and challenge them and say, what did you see? Were you actually there? That kind of thing. So.
Well, yes, I think that's the way you would do it. You would go, okay, well, this witness, like, take what they're saying just at that this person is claiming these things. We can interrogate them. We can see, hey, do they really remember it that well? Do they remember things well in general? Like, do they have good enough eyesight to have identified the person? Are they retroactively just applying this? Like, were they even there? You could do all these things, and obviously you'd want to spend more time on interrogating a witness when it's more stakes to the case. But I think you can do that, and I think you can achieve certainty after a certain point. I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, hello? Okay, great. I would say someone might achieve certainty for their own mind, but obviously there's a big difference between someone believing they are certain and empirical truth, outside of themselves as to whether that is factually true. And we see these divides all the time in all kinds of court cases with people who because the evidence wasn't sufficient, they didn't convict, but someone was guilty of something, or vice versa. Someone convicted, a jury convicts, they were certain, but years later, more evidence comes in that wasn't there at the time, and that exonerates them. Does it mean that they were less certain, about themselves at the time because they didn't have that later evidence? No, they were certain about themselves then, but they were just wrong. So it's something that we, are going to just always be facing, and obviously with more technology and more people's ability to, basically have footage of this or that and cell phone cameras, it becomes easier to observe and to corroborate people's narratives. But there's still edge cases because human minds are prone to error, and people, are doing things where they're out of sight, and it's just basically circumstantial at that point. So
we could probably wrap up that specific discussion, but I do want to clarify one thing, and perhaps you'll want to keep going on that. I'm not forcing you to wrap up there.
You're good.
But I do want to clarify that when I'm speaking of certainty, I'm not using that as like a feeling or an emotion that somebody has where they feel certain about something. I'm using that as like an epistemic state, so where you achieve certainty over a given thing if you have accounted for all of the relevant factors, you've applied the correct method, you're not ignoring any of the facts of reality, you've followed the objective method, an infallible method at every step, and I think there are infallible methods in epistemology, then you can say that you know something for certain. This is not necessarily an easy thing to do. Most people don't do it, but I think it is something that can be done. I think we've lagged out again.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, no, I understand what you're saying in terms of those methods and those outcomes. It's just that the fundamental problem here is the nature of what's being brought in, because someone is coming up with rules about what evidence is permissible or impermissible. So for example, if you were accused of murder and someone said, hey, in the 3rd grade, this guy was really angry and he said, I want to kill you. See, that's evidence. He wants to kill me, right? So you come up with limits about what it is that is going to be a probative, is often the term used, to a certain situation, and to not try to impute irrelevant or other bad acts to a situation as proof of guilt or not having guilt. But that's itself sometimes a subjective thing. And so for example, someone might bring in other evidence where they have what's called a common plan or scheme. So they try to show, okay, this person robbed this place because he went on a spree. He robbed this place and this place and this place. It was a part of a continuous act, right? Now you're bringing bad acts, except you're trying to show that it was part of a common plan or scheme. So now that's admissible, right? These questions of whether something's admissible or not admissible, or whether something is hearsay, that is a declaration made by someone other than the person who's on the stand, other than the declarant, they're saying what someone else said, whether that should be admissible or not. These are all going to be should be allowed in versus this shouldn't be allowed in, right? And that even includes evidence, in terms of rules, for police conduct, right? There's this fruit of this poisonous tree doctrine in American law, where if a police officer gets some piece of evidence, it might actually prove that you did something wrong with a crime of the victim. But if they got it illegally, right? They broke into your house without a warrant. They were supposed to get that first. Then it gets suppressed. Right? You have basically an exclusion on that, and now you can't be convicted even though you did commit the crime that has a victim, because they tainted the evidence, the source of it, by doing something that was considered illegal and violative of property rights otherwise, right? And that's a subjective standard, right, about what it takes to get a warrant. What's the evidence that it requires, that the judge requires in order to say, okay, yeah, you can go barge in this person's home and functionally violate their property rights, but it's because we have a strong, probable cause that this person is a robber and they have the stolen goods at their house, whatever. So, we could try as much as we want to try to create rules that seem to really make sure that evidence that shouldn't get in doesn't get in, and evidence that should get in does. Well, that's always going to be judge, prosecutor, defendant, depending on what the judge rules for each piece of evidence. If they're going to say it's admissible, inadmissible, that kind of thing. It's going to always tie to something that is going to be about subjective evaluation. Even if you apply these ideas about saying an epistemological certainty, that itself isn't going to say whether it's true or false, right? I can listen to a witness, and the witness can say something that is true, and I say, oh, okay, they said a statement, and that they're claiming this thing happened, but you didn't see it yourself. You don't have any video, you don't have pictures, you don't have anything else, but they said something happened. Now that witness, you could believe or disbelieve, but that doesn't change the truth of the situation. The witness could be telling the truth, and okay, you could believe them, or they could be sincerely believing that they're telling the truth, but they were mistaken, and you could believe them and then be wrong. So it's just really tough to get to that. It's just really tough. So.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that the current justice system, with all their norms, I completely agree that none of those are based in epistemology. But I do think it is possible to get norms which are based in a good epistemology. I suppose we could probably cap it there. I think I've covered everything I wanted to discuss on the use of force, at least for now. Did you have any areas you wanted to bring up, any burning questions?
I like your thought process on epistemology. I would love to see you flesh that out and to framework it and to have more discussion on that. That'd be wonderful. I think that is certainly a good endeavor to help try to formulate libertarian legal theory in a more concrete, objective way as much as possible. So I think that's great. I think the only other issues we could possibly ever talk about would be any current events, or anything as relates to this, if we want to talk about like exploding pagers or something. But I mean, we covered a lot of the topics, in terms of their core philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, it was great having you on again. You can come back anytime you want. You want to say goodbye to the people, plug anything?
Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate having me on. I love what you're doing. I want you to keep up the good work. I think that what you're doing, what Prax Ben is doing, and the like, I think is fantastic, and we really need more of it, because people have flaked out in many cases, or kind of left the proverbial ship because they haven't been grounded in philosophy and thinking skills. And so we need more than ever thinking skills education from an ANCAP mindset. So I really appreciate that. And on that note of plugging on the things, I'd recommend, obviously I have Philosophical Voluntarism. That's a great little primer on philosophy. A Vision for Libertarian Future. My book there that's talking about kind of an incrementalism, and the Definitive Guide to Libertarian Voluntarism. That's breaking down the core concepts in a very easily digestible format with lots of other citations, so you could expand your food for thought. And I do recommend, for thinking through some legal issues, Kinsella's book here, Legal Foundations for a Free Society. Even though he does cite me just to disagree with me, it's okay. I think it's fun. I have a good time. I love the guy. He's a fun guy. So I think that's a great framework to start with to really get your thinking going and to think about some of the history, because it is actually a very good history book too, because he wrote this essentially compiled over lifetime work, 30 years. So whether you agree or disagree, of course I don't agree with everything, but I do agree with a lot of stuff in here too. It's just a really meaty, as you can see, treatise on some of these foundations, some of the things that inform us today. And I think it's kind of a new frontier. Libertarian legal theory is very much a very fresh thing. It's actually not developed at all, in part because the principles of liberty don't necessarily impute exactly every single standard. It doesn't tell you, hey, this person should be punished for this amount of time or this amount of money or this or that, right? It's up to us to kind of take the principles and think about what makes sense and why, and to articulate standards or to articulate at least directions, like, hey, just like estoppel, like, okay, what's the minimums and maximums, right? At a bare minimum. So I think that the work you're doing here now is great toward that end, and I think we're going to see some more good stuff coming up. So
Thank you. Yeah. I'll see you next time.
all right, take care.
Yeah. Alrighty. And there. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you again to Kareem for the $20. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Goodbye everyone. Boop.